like to thank Lou and Thomas for inviting me. It's a real honour and pleasure to be here, and I'm going to start, as you never should, never apologise, never explain, with both a confession and an apology. So my confession is that I'm a philosopher, and I'm not even a political philosopher like Tim, but I'm a moral philosopher. So my confession is impact is even harder for moral philosophers than it is for political philosophers. So I hope that the things I'm going to say, so when Lou gave me my brief to talk about the Centre for the Study of Global Ethics and my own work and impact, I was worried. I've got more worried over the last 2 days. I've heard about all the amazing impact that you're all having, and therefore it is in somewhat in trepidation that I stand here to tell you about the Centre for the Study of Global Ethics. But I hope that even though our impact may not be quite what yours is, and probably what it should be, there may be some things in the kind of stuff that I do that can feed into that, and certainly I'm here to learn how to do the stuff you guys do so well better. So I guess first thing to say is that lots of the things that Tim said are very similar to the things that our university is doing, and his approach and my approach in terms of the way you use the centres are very similar, and it's lovely to hear because Edinburgh is in fact my home institution where I grew up, as it were. So to Birmingham. The Centre for the Study of Global Ethics was founded in 2001. At that time it was a standalone centre in the School of Public Policy. In 2006 we moved into philosophy. And the remit of the centre was to be a multidisciplinary hub to bring academics, policymakers and practitioners into some dialogue. And the intention was to build first a multidisciplinary research profile, second to teach, and third to lead the development of global ethics as an academic endeavour. So global poverty and injustice was and is one of the core topics that the centre is concerned with. But poverty has been treated as part of a cluster of concerns, and here again I endorse Tim's view that we need to connect these challenges together and not see them in isolation. So topics which staff at the centre have worked on include global health, women's rights, trafficking and migration, war and conflict and climate change. Of course, in all of these, poverty is a key and exacerbating feature. So we've had some success and we've had some failure. Key to what the centre has done in the past has depended very much on the wishes and interests of the director of the centre. So I'm the third director. The first was Donna Dickinson and the previous director was Tom Sorrell, and I took over last year. And I think that tying the work of the centre too closely to one person's vision has perhaps not resulted in the most cumulative and sustained impact. So I hope that I can be less directive and more facilitative and bring in more of the people at Birmingham who are working on these topics. So where have we had some success then? I think we've had success in 3 areas. First in topics and in funded projects. Second, in the development of global ethics, and third, like Tim, I'm going to talk a little about teaching. So all of our funded projects, and these are just some of the ones that I could remember from the top of my head, and as you can see, I haven't included all of the things that I need there. So some of our, all of our projects have had practitioner involvement, policymaker involvement relative to the topic, and all have had impact goals as part of the deliverables of the projects, whether that is policy recommendations or best practice to industry, etc. So projects have been on women's rights, health, global governance, security, microfinance, and some of them are very well known to people here. So Sigrid, for instance, was very involved in both the Proper project and the Tissue project, and Lou worked very closely with Tom on the microfinance projects, and in fact Lou has a co-edited book with Tom Sorrell under review on microfinance rights and global justice. And in outputs we have been quite successful. So these are some of the books from the projects. I couldn't remember the dates of the women's rights books, but it's somewhere around, I don't know, somebody can look it up on their app while we're waiting. And I didn't realise I couldn't change my PowerPoint on my iPad, so I apologise for the incomplete slide. I am very technically challenged. So outputs, we've been successful. The first project we did, so those women's rights books, they are a mixture of country reports, state of the arts in what's happening in those issues. They have activist perspectives in them, as well as academic chapters. The Governance of Genetic Information, that's a book where in fact Sigrid has a chapter, and the special issues that we did. So we've succeeded in these ways, but as everybody has been saying, writing books that nobody reads is pretty poor impact. So I think we're going to have to do a little better. So some success, but perhaps not as it should be. The second area I mentioned is the development of global ethics as an area. And here again, we've had some limited but partial success. We've partly done this in our own publications, but also collectively. And perhaps most importantly was the establishment of the Journal of Global Ethics, which has been running for nearly a decade. So the first issue was 2005, and it was launched by myself, Christine van den Anker, and Serku Helston, who were then all staff of the centre. And we aimed to promote the vision of global ethics that the centre had, one about multidisciplinarity and engagement. And again, we were partially successful. It is a multidisciplinary journal. It is properly concerned with real-world issues and justice theorising and re-theorising. And the most recent volume is that one up there on critical approaches to global justice. The third area of impact is teaching, which we haven't talked about as much as maybe we could. So in 2003, we launched the first master's programmes in global ethics, and by 2006, we were running at around 40 a year. There has been some change in that, but we're now getting back up to those numbers again. And we run programmes in global ethics, human rights, and international law and ethics, which is in collaboration with the law department and the politics department, as well as other sister programmes in the philosophy department on things like health and happiness, bioethics and law. So we have quite a strong critical mass of programmes there. And I think we need to think more about how we systematically take the benefits from teaching and use them for impact. So for instance, most of my students on those MSc programmes, some have gone on to do PhDs with me and want to be academics, but an awful lot have gone on to work in policy and NGO work in one form or another. So maintaining those relationships more formally for placements and for other things might be something to build into a long-term plan. Also, PhD students. The impact of PhD students in changing views about what philosophy is as they go on to jobs is quite a significant battle for those of us within philosophy, where so often anything that is applied or connected to the real world is not proper philosophy. You know, you're messing about out there. What are you doing with that data? That's corrupt. Come on. So sending out students into the world and into academic jobs, as we seem to be doing, who have this agenda to philosophy, which I actually think is what philosophy was doing until it got corrupted, is an important area in which over the long term we can have some impact. And here global recruitment is crucial. I've just got that. Talking about PhD students, that's Herji, who's just finishing, so I told her I'd show you her because I'm very proud of her. Global recruitment is crucial. So we're doing some things on this, but not nearly enough. So here, Lou and Thomas and Ashok's collaboration in India is a crucial way of delivering a doctoral exchange programme and a model that we could build upon. We've also been establishing distance learning models of teaching, both at Masters and at PhD, and in terms of having truly global students, that makes it much more likely and far easier to fund financially for those students. Okay, so that's the centre. This brings me now to me. So Lou already mentioned various of my books. So I quite like book covers, so most of them are quite pretty. So I do a mix of virtue theory, global ethics, bioethics and feminist philosophy. The stuff that I'm working on now is the Handbook of Global Ethics with Daryl. We think we've been working on this for 5 years. Fingers crossed, we are nearly there. Unless something goes wrong, it will be out this year. But it has been a long project, which, as Daryl was admitting to me, if he'd have known what was involved, he wouldn't have agreed when I begged him to do it with me. Other things I'm doing is I'm also co-writing a capability approach to global health. And then the third one, which Lou mentioned, is my monograph that I'm most excited about, which is called Perfect Me with Princeton University Press. And this is a book about beauty and perfection and justice, where I do everything from skin colour to cosmetic surgery and globally. So this might sound a little off beam from the rest of my work, but I actually think it has exactly the same themes, critiques and concepts, and it's far from trivial if one thinks about the global beauty and diet industries. And David was telling me on my first night here that even in instances of quite extreme poverty, skin lightening cream is still seen as something very desirable. So I'm sure I can convince you further on that if needed, but it's also a book that, in terms of impact, is going to be well marketed, priced affordably, and I'm exploring the possibility of launching it with also an app which will then produce data that feeds back into future research. And I did hear Jonathan's advice yesterday that maybe one should slow down and make sure the books are excellent instead of good, and I'm going to try and heed that. So quite a lot of my work, the introduction, the handbook, and far too many book chapters and papers, has been on global ethics directly, what global ethics is and why it might matter. And very briefly, I argue that global ethics is threefold. First, multidisciplinary, as a methodological commitment, not simply contingently. And second, it connects theory to practice, which of course philosophers often don't do and even don't think you should do. And it does this not in the traditional way that some applied ethicists do, of thinking that there's a theory that you can just roll out, but rather with engagement and respect and proper attention to empirical evidence and data. And third, it requires the global scope in the ethical frame, which doesn't, of course, mean that you don't work locally, you do, but you take the consequences of those actions globally into account. So much of my work on global ethics is framing work. I don't think that this is unimportant. It's very useful in pointing out that many of the assumptions that theories have and that they are premised on are not neutral but determining. But it is very broad brush work. So in terms of my own kind of original research, there's a few significant themes that I think tie all of the work that I've done from war to biobanks to beauty together. And in something of a caricature, I argue that dominant ethical individual frameworks, particularly things like consent and choice, are very inadequate. They protect neither individuals, and more importantly for global ethics, they don't protect public goods. So I've argued in lots of debates that getting this wrong matters, and it matters theoretically, practically, and in policy terms, as it leads to a reliance on individuals and their choices, which makes social change very hard. And this is for a whole host of reasons. I'll only give you two now. First, if you adopt this model, it makes it difficult to criticise unethical and exploitative practices, because that's seen as criticising the individuals. And in these models then, consent becomes, as I've said, some kind of magical substance, a kind of fairy dust for turning things that are unethical ethical. And I've made this in many places, from prostitution to body part sale, and especially in the trade in global reproductive markets and services, and in the increasing trade done by your governments and consumer companies in genetic material and data. Second, it focuses attention on individuals and processes, and therefore it serves to obscure real harms and structural injustices. And I've argued that this focus makes it hard to protect public goods. And again, I've argued this in a lot of forums, in genetic ethics and biobanks, genetic heritage, protecting the efficacy of antibiotics in my most recent paper, to protecting public goods such as public health, natural resources and the environment. Okay, so I won't talk any more about what I write, but my general concern is for contexts and structures which feed directly into concerns about how we understand what human beings are, and therefore how we protect them, enable human flourishing into the future. In terms of my direct impact, I've probably had most in the health arena than any other. And one thing that I'm certain of is that we need more interaction between different fields. Just to give one example, with a few very notable exceptions, such as Sigrid, bioethicists tend to regard bioethical concerns as separate from other ethical and justice issues. And this is very dangerous, because it is the reasoning of bioethicists that is very influential in the policy world and has led the development of medical and scientific practices, and often these models then flow into other governance forms, consent being an obvious example. And these are areas where academics, ethicists, lawyers and social scientists really do have a voice, and therefore it matters that many of those who are speaking in these debates are largely unconcerned with justice, let alone with global justice. So, to my own impact in policy, as I've said, it's very small and meagre compared to what you guys have done. But my work on the failure of ethical governance in genetics led me to give the keynote at the World Medical Association last year on how to revise the Declaration of Helsinki. And I understand, I've been told by the drafters, that the reason that biobanks are now mentioned in the revised draft out for consultation is down to my moaning, shall we say. They didn't, of course, advise the solutions of how they should change the practices. They just said, oh yes, this is something that it doesn't fit. But at least it's a step. And as Lou said, I work on the Ethics and Governance Council of UK Biobank. Given that this is the first of its type and size, it is in fact leading the development of ethics and governance in this area, and I think this is the most valuable work I've probably done and possibly will ever do. It's not work on poverty directly, of course, but through my persistence and those of a few like-minded individuals, we have done much to keep public interest and public good as necessary gatekeepers. And while more public models such as benefit sharing and profit sharing have not yet been adopted, they are still on the table, and I am certain they would not be if it hadn't have been for our constant persistence. And such models have applicability for communal and shared goods well beyond medical and scientific areas, and given that governance often flows that way, ethical practices from the sciences flow out, this is an important area. I've done lots of other stuff like public lectures and at festivals and events and Amnesty, and I think this is important for awareness raising, but I'm not sure it actually changes things. In the policy work, I can say that I changed something, but much less than I would like, and also it was unbelievably hard for very relatively small return. I also have to confess that I'm standing down this year for the ref panel reasons that Lou has mentioned, so I'm about to have even less impact. Okay, the future then. A couple of opportunities, challenges, and then some thoughts. The first opportunity for my own centre is the philosophy department at Birmingham, which is transforming and growing, and we're going with it. So I put this together before I got here, so there's less philosophers here than I thought there would be, but if the philosophers here, if you look at our distinguished research professors, Hartree Field, Kit Fine, Stephen Neal, we're bringing in some of the best philosophers in the world as part-time appointments, and not up there yet, but who will be joining us next year is Alison Jagger, who I assume needs little introduction. Okay, sorry. Sorry, Lou. We've also appointed a number of new staff in global ethics. So Alison Jagger, Scott Weiser is joining us. So some of you will know Scott from Thomas's projects. It's on your Global Justice Programme. The bottom project on gender equality measurement is where Scott has been, and Thomas and everybody else will tell you he's a complete star, and I'm thrilled that he's coming, not least because I will be going off to the REF panel and he will be the Deputy Director of the Centre. Lou has been very involved in the Centre, and this year again became Deputy Director for International Links, and I'm slightly heartbroken that Lou will be leaving us next year, but I'm sure he will continue to be involved. One other possibility is that we have an Institute of Advanced Studies that launched last year, and there are two initial themes, and one of them, the title of which I would like to disown, the Saving Humans title, but this is one of the two themes that Birmingham has launched in its Institute of Advanced Studies, and this is run by myself, by Nick Wheeler, who you may know from the Saving Strangers book, and by Paul Jackson, who Lou mentioned yesterday, who is featured on the ASAP site for his impact at the moment. So we launched only on the 30th of September, and we launched with a daily blog, which sounds arduous, but it's actually not, because we roll it. So different academics at Birmingham do 1 week, where they do 5 posts for that week, and then it rolls on. So it's starting to give us some presence. We also have visiting fellows, and I'm currently trying to persuade Daryl to come and be one of our first ones. No pressure, Daryl. And obviously the biggest opportunity is what we can do together. So let me finish with some final thoughts about impact. Sorry, I wanted to say one challenge first, and it's one that Tim talked about a little bit and Jonathan talked about a little bit yesterday, which is about the mixed and potentially incompatible targets that we set ourselves. So as Lou mentioned yesterday, the impact agenda is now recognised in the UK, but grudgingly and in a secondary way, and not endorsed by many academics. And somehow, those of us who want to do this, especially when we're in disciplines that don't embrace impact, we have to find ways that we can both meet the academic requirements of our discipline and do impact. And this isn't easy. So if we think about writing, the kind of work that is seen as good enough to submit, for instance, to the REF is not the kind of work that has impact usually, not always, but usually. But academics who don't get high REF scores will not be academics for long. So I can talk more about the REF, but you really, really don't want to know. All you need to know is it's a pretty horrendous way for assessing academics. Now that's very UK, but it's true for all of us that in one way or another, we have to be good academics as judged by our disciplines and our institutions if we want to have the kind of status and profiles from which to have impact. So these different demands of us have to be somehow balanced in a way that we can achieve both. So my final thoughts. First, an obvious and easy one for an academic should be about thinking about what we write, who we're writing for, and how we can have impact. And sometimes this can be much simpler than we imagine. One thing that we can all do is just think about the right output for the right publisher. So my introduction to global ethics, I chose Acumen as the publisher for that because they were willing to provide a very cheap book, and I wanted this book to be a book that was read not by other academics but by students and was affordable. My REF book by Cambridge University Press is not affordable, and I don't anticipate it will be read by students. So thinking about what you publish where is and who you want to read it is an important first step. Likewise, when Daryl and I negotiated the contract for the handbook, we included the clause that a significant number go to developing world libraries. So even though the handbook may not be affordable, it can be more accessible. So things like that are small and easy. And I think that was Daryl's idea, so I should give him credit for that. Thinking about teaching, so I've talked about impact from and on traditional students, but also from short courses, from professional development, which we've done some of, but we could do more. And Andre's idea yesterday about myth busting for journalists I thought was fabulous, and on things that are difficult to understand, like genetic public goods or antibiotic resistance, you'd think wouldn't be difficult, but actually people don't understand things like the necessity of finishing courses of drugs and things. That could be a very easy way forward. Public and outreach events, universities are good at this. They're easy to do. We've been doing them for a long time, but they are very effective at awareness raising and some of that motivation stuff, and this is where our students, our amazing students, always come in and make these things work so well. Fourth, the need to build long-term and sustainable policy relationships. So that was something that was talked about yesterday. It's hard to build those kind of relationships, but that's how you affect policy, and it's long-term. So here, that's one thing to think about later when we think about how we can do it. If we start presenting ourselves collectively, I mean, some people, like Thomas, of course, have lots of these relationships, but most of us manage to foster one or two. But if collectively we share some of these relationships, or we present ourselves as a collective of experts where we don't all do everything, but we have our strengths, then we may be more effective in utilising the expertise we have and passing people to the right person to do that bit of the ethics impact consultancy stuff. And this brings me to my final general point, the need to play to our strengths. So as Tim said, lots of philosophers are very bad at outreach. I know that I am happiest in my pyjamas with my laptop. Anywhere else, I am less happy. So playing to our strengths, working out who we want to have impact on, exactly how we could have it, with the skills that we have or realistically could teach ourselves to have. And here again, dividing the load, strategizing together, and playing to our strengths might just work really well. Thank you very much.